Rodgers gets the snap. Blitz is on. Rodgers scrambles left, winds up Rainbow.
Cobb.
He's got Cobb at the 10 to the 5
Yes!
to the end zone. Touchdown and a dagger. Oh my goodness. An NFC North Division Championship dagger.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Real Packers Talk, the podcast dedicated to everything green and gold. I am your host, Ethan Peltier. You can find me anywhere on Instagram or Twitter at Real Packers Talk, and I'm here to break down the recent preseason matchup between the New England Patriots and the Green Bay Packers. But, of course, before I get into any of that, I do want to send out my thoughts and prayers to Isaiah Bolden, his family, his loved ones, his teammates. If you haven't heard by now, this game was ended short. It was technically suspended with about 10 minutes to go in the fourth quarter after a really, really scary injury where it looked like two Patriots defenders kind of ran into each other, and unfortunately Isaiah Bolden took a really, really nasty shot in the head area. He was then not carted, but rather put on a stretcher and taken off the field. And after a couple minutes of deliberation and conversations between the two head coaches, they decided that it was in their best interest for both the teams, just in general, as far as just everyone involved, to end the game right then and there, which I am not going to fault anyone for. I 100% agree that that was the right decision. The good news is that I heard, Isaiah Bolden was taken to a local hospital in Green Bay. I believe he has been cleared, and they did say that he had, quote, feelings in all extremities, which is really good news, and obviously, we just hope that he's okay. It is kind of a sobering moment, if you will, just the way that it all played out. It reminds you that this is a very violent sport, and the NFL nowadays is going to prioritize health and safety as much as they can, which again is why I believe that this was the right decision. After last year's incident with Damar Hamlin, I think everyone's a little bit more on edge and kind of anticipating what might happen. I even heard that the NFL increased the amount of medical staff that's available for each game. These are all good things that they're at least trying to be as best prepared for it as possible. But again, last night just goes to show you can't, as much as you prepare, you can't prevent it. You can't 100% prevent these things from happening. So once again, I just want to send out my thoughts and prayers to both Isaiah Bolden and everyone else who was affected by this. Moving forward, I do want to address the first team offense as well as the first team defense. That's probably what a majority of this episode is going to be dedicated towards because, as I said in my last episode, all eyes are on Jordan Love, and he's going to be put under a microscope, and that's fine. But let's just go over what happened. First and foremost, the first drive that the Packers had, just abysmal. And watching the game, I was really confused about what happened. I believe on the 5th or maybe 6th play of the drive, Josh Myers fired a snap kind of outside and to the right over Jordan Love, and it resulted in a fumble that the Patriots recovered, and they were able to go ahead and put up a touchdown pretty quickly after that. Now, watching the game, in that moment, I was like, man, what the heck is going on? Josh Myers has already had kind of a shaky camp as well as a shaky performance in the first preseason. His job may or may not be in jeopardy. So that fumble really, I think, caused a lot of concern. However, it does sound like Matt LaFleur addressed this in his press conference. He says that they're trained to do that. Apparently, Josh Myers and a couple of the other linemen thought they saw one of the New England Patriots flinch and try to jump on the defensive line. Thus, if everything works out the way it's supposed to, they see someone flinch, they snap the ball, and it's a free play. We all know that Aaron Rodgers was really, really good at that, and, that's something that they coach. So knowing that, I'm not nearly as concerned about it. Obviously, you still want to make sure that your center and your quarterback are on the same page, but it wasn't as an abysmal decision as I initially thought. After that, though, I thought the offense responded very, very well. So I remember in my last episode I asked the question, hey, are they gonna play more than 2 drives? And technically they played 3, although I wouldn't say that first one really counted, especially after that botch snap that, resulted in a fumble. So I think what they wanted to do, I think initially they were going to have the offense play just 2 drives, and then that happened, so they said, okay, scratch that, we're going to have to do at least one more. And I thought the offense responded really well. That's one thing that in the Matt LaFleur era that this team has kind of struggled with, is they get punched in the mouth or they make a mistake early on, and they are either slow to respond or they don't respond at all. But in this case, they actually did respond, which is promising. Jordan Love, his stat line for the night was 5 for 8 for 84 yards and a touchdown. I believe his QBR rating was in the, or his quarterback rating was in the, I think 137 range. I don't know it off the top of my head. And then he also had 2 rushes for 11 yards, in which one of those plays he climbed the pocket, escaped, slid down, and then a Patriots player fell on him. And things got a little bit chippy after that. I mentioned in my last episode how I was going to be keeping an eye on the intensity levels throughout this game, and it was definitely there. You can tell that these teams were getting really chippy with each other. After that, Jordan Love hit every single offensive lineman on the Packers got up in, I believe, 96s. I don't know his name off the top of my head on the Patriots, but they all got up in his face and started shoving him around. And again, not that I want players to go get in fights, but it's good to see that they're standing up for their quarterback. And obviously, that's their guy. So, good things to see. I thought that it was pretty solid. After that, though, they got close to the end zone, and Jordan Love had let me back up a little bit, actually. Before that happened, before the slide that resulted in a little bit of a skirmish, Jordan Love fired a 42-yard bomb to Romeo Doubs on the sideline, which was initially ruled out of bounds. However, after review, the Packers did challenge the call. It was determined that Romeo did get both feet in bounds. And one of the things that I mentioned in my previous episode is that everything Jordan Love does is going to be put under a microscope. And that, like I said, that's fine. Everyone's going to be talking about this throw. And I've seen both sides as far as like, oh, it's a really good throw, and oh, that's a terrible throw. And I kind of find myself somewhere in the middle. I think that the ball could have been thrown better, sure, but he did put it in a place that Romeo Doubs was able to make a play, and it resulted in a 42-yard completion. So I don't know how much I would be complaining about that. Just in general, I'm okay with that play. I'm okay with them making just good enough plays, if that makes sense, especially this early on, for as young as they are, for as much as they're just trying to figure it out as they're going along. Moving forward, there was that slide that resulted in the skirmish that I just mentioned, and then after that, Jordan Love had a completion to Jaden Reed where he just zips it in there, and Jaden Reed walks into the end zone. It was a really good route with pretty good coverage. The defender was only maybe a half step behind Jaden Reed, but that's all Jordan Love needed. He kind of he did a little pump and then zipped it right in there for a touchdown. So it was good to see that our starting offense once again was able to at least score a touchdown against an otherwise pretty good Patriots defense. Now, I know that comes with the caveat of, the Patriots probably aren't playing all their starters, but they were playing a decent amount of them, including, I'm pretty sure Judon was in there for a couple of drives. It's not like the Packers' first offense was moving the ball against nobodies. They had a 93-yard drive against a really, really good defense. So all in all, promising performance from Jordan Love and the rest of the crew. And again, not something to hang your hat on. I think that they're always going to want to improve and get better. But this is 2 weeks in a row now that we've seen the Packers go up against a solid defensive opponent and then be able to not only move the ball, but score within a drive or two. And those are things that are going to be important moving forward. Now that my whole Jordan Love spiel is out of the way, I do want to talk about the rest of the team and the other guys that I told you that I would be keeping my eye out for. One of the players that I actually didn't mention in my last episode that I think I meant to was Sean Clifford, who had another solid performance. He went, I believe, 13 for 19 with 130-some yards, and probably would have had more if the game hadn't gotten cut short, but again, it's nice to see that we have at least a solid number two. I pray that we don't see him play at all this year, and for obvious reasons. But worst case scenario, the Packers are going to be able to put someone out there if there's an emergency. After that, I've been keeping my eye out on Malik Heath for the longest time, and I'm going to continue to pound the table for this guy. Opinions are a little mixed online as far as, like, where people view him on the roster as, like, is he wide receiver number 4? Is he wide receiver number 5, 6, 7? Like, I've seen different opinions. And I know that, I don't know anything, comparatively speaking, to everyone that's involved inside the building in Green Bay. Like, everyone who actually works there, they probably have a much different way of looking at things. But on the outside looking in, I don't know how Malik Heath doesn't make this team. And I'm going to, like I said, continue to pound the table for him. He had 5 receptions for 75 yards. There was one instance where Sean Clifford just kind of threw it up into, I think, triple coverage, and Malik Heath just comes down with the ball. He's a good blocker. He makes plays when he has to. He can easily take over that role that Alan Lazard plays. And look, like I said, I'm going to continue to root for this guy. I think he's a playmaker. And then I mentioned the Jaden Reed touchdown. He also had a pretty solid day. Moving forward, Emmanuel Wilson continues to make his presence felt. He had 15 carries for 63 yards and probably would have had more again if this game didn't get cut short, and that's fine. But he's been able to prove that he's a solid number 3. Now, the only thing right now that's in his way is he going to be able to provide on special teams? How good of a blocker is he? I personally think that Patrick Taylor is a little bit better of a blocker and probably has more utilization on special teams, which is, again, the biggest thing. But Emmanuel Wilson, if he doesn't make the roster, he definitely should make the practice squad. This guy is going to be around for hopefully a while. I really like his game. I really like his tape. Moving over to the other side of the ball, I will continue to keep my eye out on Carrington Valentine. I personally thought he had an up-and-down performance. He got called for a couple of holding calls. I mentioned how there was the fumble from the first drive, and then the Patriots had the ball like really close to the end zone. It looked like the Packers were going to hold them to a field goal attempt, and then they called Valentine on a holding call, which I'm biased. I personally thought it was a little ticky-tacky. He did hold the player, but I thought that the ball might not have been catchable. That's neither here nor there. He had an up-and-down performance. But again, with the thing that I mentioned earlier in this episode where players will have a rough start, it's about how they respond. And even despite having a lackluster start, he was able to make a couple plays here and there. I think it's inevitable that cornerbacks are going to give up plays. It's inevitable that they're going to get called for holding and stuff like that. So I'm not too worried about it. He is a very physical player, and I really, really, really like his tape. The defensive front was all over the place. There were multiple times in this game where the Patriots' offensive line just crumbled, and either Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi had to scramble to make a play. And those are both, they're both playmakers in their own respect. But it was good to see that our defensive front was causing that much chaos and that much pressure. And you can pick any one of those guys on the defensive line, and they had solid days, including Carl Brooks and Colby Wooden. And then, of course, Kingsley Enagbare. Forgive me for butchering the name. If you've listened to this podcast before, or at least if you listened last year, you know that I'm really, really high on Enagbare. I think he is a solid rotational guy. Of course, we're waiting for Rashawn Gary to get healthy and 100% again, but until then, we've got someone who can step in and make plays. He ended up having 2 sacks, which included a forced fumble as well as a fumble recovery. So he's just a dog. He's going to make plays left and right. I really was impressed with his performance last night. And then to wrap it up with the players that I was keeping my eye out for, of course, there was Anders Carlson, who I mentioned, of course, the day that I mentioned, they might have to bring in competition, Brian Gutekunst comes out in a press conference and says, we're not bringing anyone else in. This is his job to lose. This is basically his job. I'm okay with that, honestly. I think if anything, that just goes to show how much they believe in him. And look, he went out and had a perfect day. Hit both PATs, and he had a 52-yard kick that he made right at halftime. So, solid performance. You really hope that he can build off of that, and maybe moving forward, like, I still expect there to be up and down days, but moving forward, you hope that that's more of the norm. To wrap it up, though, the score did end 21-17 with the Patriots on top. The Packers were in a position to score right about when the whole scary injury happened. And look, I want to stress again that it's preseason. The decision to end the game early was definitely the correct one. It's a meaningless game. There's no reason to get anyone hurt. And I know every single time I talk about these preseason games, I mention we want to be as safe and as healthy as possible. And that goes for both teams, really. Like, I don't want to see anyone get hurt. I don't want to see anyone get carted off or put on a stretcher. It's a scary sight. And the score doesn't matter. It's preseason. They're like, again, I'm okay with the game ending when it did. Overall, we had a solid performance from our ones, despite a slow start. Couple of plays were made by our backups here and there, and after a couple of joint practices as well as 3/4 of a game, I think that's and I think both coaches think they saw enough to justify getting out of there and getting home. But with that, I am going to wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. You can find this podcast anywhere on YouTube, Anchor, or Spotify. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. As always, go Pack Go.